Welcome to a special Halloween edition of the Really Good Films Podcast, where we'll look back at the spooky films we've reviewed recently, but also look forward to the upcoming releases for November. To start, we'll look at the original review of each film, followed by extra commentary that might have spoilers. Don't worry, you'll be warned before any spoilers, so you can skip them if you wish. The films we've covered recently have had fear and fright galore, from Evil Dead Rise's possessions, to the alarming body swap of Freaky, to the nostalgic spookiness of Ghostbusters Afterlife, to last but not least, the sick and twisted 60s world of Last Night in Soho. Now we know what's in store, let's look at the original review of Evil Dead Rise. Here's what you need to know about Evil Dead Rise. It's an indirect sequel to 2013's Evil Dead, which was a reboot of a famous horror film series from the 80s and 90s. It sees a family fight for survival against demons in a dilapidated apartment block. For those who don't know, this series is well known for its gore, and without the restraints of budget, technology, or senses of the 20th century, this film, much like 2013's Evil Dead, is filled with hyper-realistic violence. The film's primary faults are that it telegraphs many of its scares, which reduces their impact, and has bookmarking segments which feel weaker than the central plot. However, fans of the previous films will want to check this out, and even if you've never seen an Evil Dead movie before, it's still an impressively intense ride. The extra thoughts on Evil Dead Rise contain slight spoilers, so if you don't want to know any more details about the film's story, feel free to skip forward now to the next review. It was sensible not to repeat the cabin setting as the main locale for the story, as it prevents this film feeling like an unnecessary repeat of 2013's Evil Dead. Regarding the bookmarking segments, it feels like the intro segment is only there for a cool title reveal and to set up its corresponding ending segment. The filmmakers seem to want to have their cake and eat it too, by giving us a sort of happy ending, but still have the evil be passed on, which is a bit of a cop-out. All of this being said, it is the best sequel we could have got to the 2013 reboot, and despite my love for the franchise, this should perhaps be the last entry. Hopefully that extra commentary helps those wanting to know more before watching Evil Dead Rise. Now it's time to look at the original review of the next film, simply titled Freaky. Here's what you need to know about Freaky. It tells the story of a high school senior who swaps bodies with a deranged serial killer and has 24 hours to switch back. Freaky has a lot of things going for it. An original concept, a great pair of leads, and a sense of fun from beginning to end. Vince Vaughn and Catherine Newton do a good job of convincing us that their characters have swapped souls, and for fans of gore, there's plenty here. Unfortunately, most of its kills, with one notable exception, aren't particularly creative. However, the film's biggest weakness is simply a lack of depth, which means beyond its premise, it's just not that memorable. Is Freaky worth seeing? Yes. Will the film become a must-watch every Halloween? Probably not. The extra review of Freaky doesn't contain spoilers, so here are some further thoughts on the film. Freaky is an interesting movie, as it falls between two audiences. It's too gory for younger teens in search of a comedy horror for Halloween, but it's too silly for young adults looking for a subversive and unique film. Its comedy mostly hits the mark, but it's never that funny, and the teen flick and horror conventions it pokes fun at are never really subverted in any meaningful way. There is an inherent limit of things you can do with the central conceit of the film, and only time will tell if another filmmaker can do something better with it. If you like the look of the trailer, it will meet but won't exceed expectations. Our next film is perhaps my personal favourite for this round of reviews. It's time to look at the initial review of Ghostbusters Afterlife. Here's what you need to know about Ghostbusters Afterlife. Its director, Jason Reitman, is the son of the late Ivan Reitman, who directed the original film and its sequel. The film follows a mum and her kids who travel to a small town, where they begin to discover their connection to the original Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters Afterlife is a shining example of how a late sequel should be done. The references to the original are lovingly woven into the plot, and the film also gives us new likeable heroes to root for. All the young actors give great performances, with McKenna Grace being particularly exceptional. There are some characters that could have been better written, and there are also some obvious exposition dumps. However, these small issues don't harm what is a very enjoyable film that is easy to recommend. The review extension of Ghostbusters Afterlife does contain some spoilers, so if that will impact your enjoyment of the film, I suggest you skip ahead to our next review. The issues with Ghostbusters Afterlife can be better explained when there is no fear of spoiling the plot. The mother character Callie is poorly written, resulting in her being a bit unlikable due to her bitterness towards her father being expressed in quite a blunt fashion, and this leaking into how she interacts with her daughter. Regarding obvious exposition, one of the clearest dumps comes as a phone call between Phoebe and Dan Aykroyd's Ray Stantz. On a more positive note, I was very impressed at the film's effects, especially the blending of the puppet and CG versions of the demonic dogs. There are very few late sequels that capture some of the magic of the original, and this is one of them. Here's hoping that the next instalment can live up to the high bar this entry sets. Our final feature sees us cross over to England's capital city, London. Let's look at the original review of Last Night in Soho. Here's what you need to know about Last Night in Soho. It's directed by Edgar Wright, who's known for such films as the Cornetto trilogy, and has an impressive cast, including Thomasin McKenzie, Anya Taylor-Joy, and Matt Smith. It follows an aspiring fashion designer who's able to enter the 1960s, where she meets wannabe singer Sandy. But this glamorous world is far darker than it first seems. Last Night in Soho is a visually stunning film that packs a punch. The 1960s world it creates is equal parts glossy and seedy, and it's here where the most engaging part of the film happens. It is a touch monotonal, with the start of the film feeling quite heavy-handed. Don't let that stop you though, as Last Night in Soho is still a compelling horror thriller that's worth a watch. The extra commentary on Last Night in Soho does contain spoilers, so with that warning out the way, let's dive deeper into the film. Last Night in Soho is really fantastic in the way that it blends the two time periods and the visual representation of the bond between fashion student Ellie and aspiring singer Sandy. There is always a risk with films that branch two lives that one just isn't as interesting as the other, but the film manages to strike a fairly good balance. However, the nastiness almost starts too fast, and so we barely get to revel in the glamorous 60s world the film creates before it shatters the illusion to show us the monstrosity beneath. The film's faceless ghosts motif is also rather overused, and its twists are fairly predictable. Overall, while it is ambitious, it's not the sort of film that warrants repeat viewings. What an exciting set of films we've reviewed recently! Now it's time for a sneak peek at some of November's new releases. The Marvels comes to us on November 10th. We get 3 superheroes for the price of 1 in The Marvels when Captain Marvel gets her powers tangled up with those of Kamala Khan and Monica Rambeau, which forces them to work together to save the universe. I will admit that I checked out of the MCU a while back, and so I don't have a huge investment in many of these characters. But the idea of 3 heroes that switch places every time they use their powers is a great narrative device that intrigues me. I am sure fans of our 3 heroines will be very excited, and knowing that this film has been delayed, I hope for their sake that this lives up to expectations. Dream Scenario also comes to us on the 10th, and sees a family man's life get turned upside down when people start seeing him in their dreams. But these dreams turn into nightmares, and our lead must face his newfound stardom. Nicolas Cage seems to be perfectly cast in this bizarre comedy which sees him play both charming everyman and nightmare figure. How far it goes, and if the change from dreams to nightmares proves too much of a tonal shift, is yet to be seen. I really like the central premise, and if it can stick the landing, this might become a quirky classic for Cage fans. We have a bounty of films on November the 17th. Let's start with The Hunger Games, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. This prequel sees Coriolanus Snow mentor and develop feelings for the female District 12 tribute during the 10th Hunger Games. The Hunger Games was a cultural phenomenon during the early to mid-2010s, and here we see it resurrected 8 years after Mockingjay Part 2 with a new cast. I worry that they've left it too long to capitalise on the original series' popularity, and that people just aren't going to be interested in more from this world. Hopefully, this turns out not to be the case. On the same day, we get Eli Roth's Thanksgiving, which sees Plymouth in Massachusetts terrorised by a mysterious Thanksgiving-inspired killer after a Black Friday riot ends in tragedy. The film is based on a mock trailer, which was played between double bills of Planet Terror and Death Proof, which were often jointly titled Grindhouse. This gruesome slasher flick does seem to have a tongue-in-cheek humour to it, which should make it more enjoyable than your standard gruesome killfest. It also features social media star Addison Rae, alongside well-known actors such as Patrick Dempsey and Rick Hoffman. Hopefully the mystery behind the murders is substantial enough to make this holiday-themed horror worth a watch. Last but not least, on this release-packed day, is Saltburn. This film sees Oxford student Oliver find himself drawn into the world of an aristocratic and charming classmate, who invites him back to his family's estate for an unforgettable summer. Saltburn seems to have class commentary at its core, with the aristocratic family seeing their life of excess as normal, and our lead as an exotic common creature to be toyed with. The principal risk for our protagonist, beyond physical danger, is that he gets lost in this detached world. Hopefully there is more nuance to the story than the light commentary I have provided here, as if there is not more substance to it, it risks being simply an interesting view of a corrupt family. Closing the month, on the 24th of November, is Disney's Wish. Wish follows Asha, a girl who wishes on a star and gets a more direct answer than she bargained for when the star comes down from the sky to join her. The film's computer-generated animation seems to evoke watercolour 2D animation. I'm glad to see Disney take a risk and deviate from the style that has been common in its animated features since Tangled. The film's feel and humour, to me at least, seems to evoke DreamWorks animated features. The story seems quite generic, and so I hope that the film has more than the always excellent Alan Tudyk as a talking goat up its sleeve. Well, that concludes this spooktacular episode of the Really Good Films podcast. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you want more from Really Good Films, don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook and YouTube. We're at Really Good Films on all of these platforms. And of course, subscribe to the podcast too on Spotify and Amazon Music. We can't wait to review more films for you soon.